Welcome to Breathe California TV. I'm Terry Trumbull. I've been volunteering for the last 29 years to do this weekly show on Monday nights at 7 p.m. And today we're talking with Lupe Franco, who did a marvelous thesis defense on her master's degree a week ago at San Jose State in Environmental Studies. So we're all aware that we have homeless problems, and even more so aware that we have housing problems. I find it amusing that when I drive up 101, there's a billboard just before Ralston Avenue as you head north that says, the Bay Area has never had a problem with housing. And then it has a quote that says absolutely no one. So we're talking with Lupe Franco, who's going to have some ideas about fairness and equity and addressing our housing and homeless problems. See you back in about 30 seconds.
It's given me a chance to go out and be with people who has the same problem. And it helps you to manage your life better too, because you hear different things from each person, and it's just been really helpful in many ways.
Welcome back. This is Breathe California TV. We're talking with Lupe Franco today. She's an outstanding San Jose State master's student who just got her thesis blessed last week. She did a presentation on it, and the faculty overseers voted to say that it was done excellently. So, Lupe, you got any steps left to get your master's degree other than showing up at a graduation ceremony?
I'm actually submitting my thesis tonight, so it's very exciting.
Well, I'm impressed. So talk a little bit about what you're going to do afterwards, because the faculty was very proud of the fact of your future.
Yeah, thank you. So I actually applied to 2 PhD programs and was accepted into the programs. I've actually just made my decision, and I am going to be attending UC Davis's PhD program in the graduate geography graduate group. So that's really exciting. I'm hoping to take this project that I will be sharing with you today into that program and kind of expanding on it even further. So it's very exciting next steps.
So I graduated from Davis so long ago, you would consider it to be ancient history. Certainly the campus bears no resemblance now to what I attended. Wasn't Santa Cruz the other place that was competing for you?
Yes, Santa Cruz.
And I taught there for 3 years, but had to quit because of need to take care of my wife, but that would have been a good choice for you too. But that's pretty good to have on your resume. So things you may not know is, I don't know, 7, 8, maybe even 10 years ago, the Regional Water Quality Control Board for the Bay Area designated 68 rivers and creeks as contaminated from, so this is something you're familiar with?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and so San Jose and the Santa Clara Valley Water District both felt a need to dive in and do something. And amusingly, our mayor, Sam Liccardo in San Jose, 3 or 4 days after he was sworn in, went with a bunch of cops and broke up a homeless encampment. I would hope, even though he did it as gently as possible, that we have some more sensible ways of solving the the problems in needing a police presence. So why don't you discuss your findings, and I'll come back and interrupt you in a few minutes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so for my research, I was really interested in, thinking about climate change and then thinking about who will be the most affected by climate change, as well as, how will they be affected and what are people doing about it. And so when you're thinking about who will be affected by climate change, it's usually very vague in general, and it's usually, disadvantaged communities or marginalized communities. But then you think like, what does this mean? And then so they can go a step further and say it's women, it's children, it's elderly, people with disabilities, people of color, or low income communities. And that's fine, but to me, that wasn't good enough. I think that there should be, a clear definition of which communities are more affected by climate change. And so, kind of taking an approach and looking at my own communities, I saw that we have, well, I live in a very Latinx centered community, but we also have a very large unhoused population. And I'm in LA County, which honestly has 56,000 people who are unhoused. And then I was living in San Jose for a year while going into my graduate program, and they have close to 10,000 people who are unhoused. And so, thinking about this population, I just didn't see that many people were talking about this population when discussing environmental justice or social justice issues. They were often left out. And I remember specifically asking someone from an environmental justice working group, like, do you have this topic as like, does it often come up in your workshops? And they said it does, but it's controversial, so we often try not to bring it up. And that was like mind-boggling to me because this population is so large and it's visible. As we were talking, we see encampments pop up everywhere now. Even through a pandemic, the population is still there. They're not inside in a safe space. And so I wanted to know what are cities and counties doing about the impending challenges that climate change will bring to this population specifically. And so the way that I did this is that I studied climate action plans, which are planning documents that cities and counties create to outline greenhouse gas reduction targets. And so in those plans, I wanted to know if there were goals and strategies that would specifically benefit unhoused populations. And my results were sad, but also not super surprising. I found that there wasn't many strategies that were specifically created with this population in demand in mind. So I wanted to learn more, and I wanted to interview planners specifically. So I wanted to gain their perspectives and see if they maybe left out strategies from the plans, or maybe they are having these conversations internally. And so I interviewed planners from the jurisdictions, and what I found, again, not very surprising, I found that they were very puzzled about these two issues and trying to talk about them at the same time. When they were creating plans, it didn't seem like it was a population that was constantly brought up, or they weren't really sure how to tackle it because it was just controversial. It seemed daunting to them, and also the stigma that is behind houseless populations is also a factor that kind of stops people from tackling these issues. And so to me, that was very eye-opening, and I hope that it was also eye-opening for the planners. And I brought those kind of conversations back into my writing, and I wanted to create recommendations that were not just to help unhoused populations be protected from climate change impacts, but also help planners think about equity and think about how they can better plan for their communities through strategies that are equitable but are also appropriate, and they actually keep in mind the most vulnerable populations. And so some of the recommendations that I created was, building trust with this community, because often that lacks, especially because of the criminalization that we know occurs with unhoused populations. And more strategies, including like on the ground planning and getting to know people so that they can actually learn and hear from the people themselves instead of just making assumptions of what they need. So that was a little bit about my research. I hope that it sparks a conversation with planners, and it sparks conversation with their communities and gets them motivated to go out and actually create these plans that are more equitable.
So I'm going to ask you this question more bluntly than you stated it, but it sounds to me like we're drafting plans on addressing homeless and people that are, as you described it, unhoused.
Mhm.
Only we don't bother to ask them about how to address the problem.
No, so when I asked them planners about whether or not unhoused populations or service providers were included in the planning process, they often said no, or the ones who did weren't necessarily able to tell me at what capacity or even which organizations they reached out to. And then a step further, when asked if they would start including this population in the planning process in the future, they also still remained unsure. And they kind of weren't sure of how to even tackle this sort of topic and how to even create a conversation with this group.
So I think there's probably a certain fondness for blame.
Mhm.
We talked about streams in the Bay Area being designated as polluted, and the presumption was that the homeless were causing the problems. I don't think there's any doubt they were part or even a significant portion of it, but we're getting plastic into our rivers and streams, not just through homeless population. In 1994, I filed a lawsuit against the city of Santa Cruz, which was dumping raw untreated sewage into the Pacific Ocean right at the pier on the beach. And the council was quite blunt in all of the newspapers saying it was all due to homeless. When the city was actually pumping the untreated sewage out once a week. So it'd be hard pressed to say anything. It's just, if you're relatively powerless, it's easy to pick on you to say you're creating a problem. But I thought you did a great job of highlighting the lack of input from the very people that we were trying to change their behavior.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's I think it's easy, like you said, to put a blame on this. And even when you have conversations like this, people usually even refer to this population as a type of pollution themselves, or that's the way that they are seen, and that's the way it's easy for people to try to remove it, because that's the problem. To have less waste on our streets, then we just gotta remove the people who are producing that waste instead of thinking about more better solutions. LA County actually spent about $30 million in just street sweep services, and only about of that, it's just they're just displacing people, and they're just causing further trauma. But it's not a solution, because then they just go somewhere else, and they are trying to find housing somewhere else, and it just causes trauma for them, and it doesn't really fix the solution. So it's yeah, it's they're just making assumptions, and I think that it's better if we can create an inclusive conversation where we can actually think about better solutions for everyone.
So one of the things that I'm struck by your discussion is the term environmental justice. So everybody in San Jose's environmental studies department realized immediately this is an environmental justice issue. What is an environmental justice issue?
Yeah, so environmental justice is the fair treatment of everyone, no matter the race, the color of your skin, your income. It is a study that was, or it's a movement that was created after studies found that especially Black populations are discriminated against, and they are living in areas that have very high air pollution or infrastructure that is causing health issues. And so that's seen in those communities um, with these disadvantaged communities rather than in affluent communities. And so the movement is kind of based on this injustice and trying to help this community into gaining a better, healthy world where they can all live in, no matter of who you are. And so that kind of transcends into climate justice, which is now taking on climate change issues as well, and thinking about who will be most affected by climate change.
So perhaps feel free to correct me on this, but my recollection of your thesis defense was that you largely said that general plans and climate change documents, of which you looked at 15,
Mhm.
didn't cover the issue.
No, there was a few that did have this issue, but it was mostly around housing, which of course is interesting and very important. Housing, and how to get this population into housing. Um, but I think as we know, housing takes a long time to build and it takes a long time to get people into housing. And so the way that I approach this is, well, what kind of solutions can we create for people today that will help them live and survive for tomorrow, for next week, next year, while they're still living in the streets and while we have these impacts of climate change, such as like, the wildfires that we had last year or the heat waves that we are expected to have.
So what I been kind of leading to here with the definition is the Clinton administration was very aggressive at requiring agencies that they regulated, like the Bay Area Air Quality Management District here, to adopt environmental justice requirements. And 5 years ago, when I was teaching politics in the environment, I gave the students in the class an assignment to try to find some spot where those regulations had actually been enforced, and they weren't able to come up with anything, which is pretty pathetic. And I was chief judge for the air district for 15 years, and we never had a case. There wasn't anything being done there. And I suspect the same is true with regional boards and other pollution control agencies that the Clinton administration required to put regulations in place. Any comments on that?
Wow, that's crazy. I hope that I haven't looked at it specifically, but I hope that that's a different case today. I know that we're trying to kind of broaden this definition of even environmental justice in like communities. So I think that now more than ever, activists and like younger people as well are really standing up for everyone, trying to be more inclusive of, you know, BIPOC communities, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color. And we even see like today, activists standing up for unhoused population. So I hope that that's changed, but I don't know. We'll see.
Well, the good news is you're working on getting it changed.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk with Lupe some more in about 30 seconds when we have another introduction to Breathe California. So come back and see us in 30 seconds.
What it feels like to have an asthma attack is, well, you can't breathe and you can't tell anybody that you're having an asthma attack because you can hardly talk. You can maybe say 1 or 2 words, but you can't say much else. Breathe California has helped me come in contact with more asthmatics and more people who have the same case as I do. It's important to me because I don't feel like I'm alone in the fight against asthma.
So welcome back to Breathe California TV. Breathe California has 5 chapters throughout California, and we're the nonprofit that protects your lungs. And environmental justice issues are a big deal because they often relate to air pollution, which is a more severe problem for our lungs than smoking. Not that you should ever think about smoking. But what else do we need to talk about, Lupe, that we haven't hit?
I think that we should, I think changing, not, I kind of talked about changing the perspectives of planners, but also it's important to change the perspectives of community members. I think that we also kind of are responsible for, when having the discussions of houseless populations, we also have a say in like how we can treat them better. And so I think just starting off with the way that we talk about them and the stigma that we carry around them, I think I'm trying to be more inclusive and follow the movement that is already occurring by switching to alternative words when referring to this population. So unhoused, unsheltered, curbside communities, and not just homeless, because homeless means that they don't have a home, but to this population, where they are is their home, so they just don't have the structure that constitutes them as, that what constitutes as a home. So I would say that we can start there and be more inclusive and try to, help wherever we can.
Yeah, that's a big issue. The Air District realized they had a problem and tried to set up some community liaison people to get minorities and homeless more involved, and seemed to have relatively little success. Having been a planner myself for about 30 years, the system is really set up to often a forum for people to provide input who are already organized. But it's not very good in going out and identifying people that aren't organized and getting them into the system.
Right. Yeah, and that's where then this community kind of slips through the cracks, and you just kind of forget about them. But hopefully, as environmental justice and being more inclusive of people into the planning processes and into the conversations will help. And I think this is a great format as well, to be able to reach people in San Jose and Campbell who do have such a large houseless population as well.
Absolutely. So I congratulate San Jose State. It immediately dove into doing something when the Black Lives Matter issue came up. I would say that while we were aware of environmental justice issues and interested in them, we got a lot more active in the whole issue because of the interest in equity. But it's a tough one to tackle. I would urge you to watch a movie called Bulworth. Are you familiar with that?
No. Yeah.
So Warren Beatty made it. It may have been his last film, and he plays a US senator from California that goes nuts and starts telling people the truth. So in the movie, they do an imaginary conversation with a African-American church congregation. And one of the people in the congregation asked him, why didn't you do the stuff you promised 6 years ago? And he said, did you contribute to me? Did you show up to vote? Those are the people that elected officials pay attention to. So this notion of fighting and scratching and encouraging people to vote and get more active in the process is real critical. It's our government, and it's up to us to go out and do something about it.
Definitely. Yeah, it's always the people who already have an interest in participating who are voiced, their voices are heard the loudest, not the people who actually have, who will be affected the most. And so I think that's a great thing to say. Just keep fighting and keep going out and helping people who aren't invited.
Yeah. And the nice thing I've seen with our local government is very responsive to people that get out and get involved. Each of the commissions I've served on has about 5 or 6 self-appointed people who regularly get up and participate and present their perspective. And I think they have a significant effect on what we're doing.
Definitely. There's a lot of community groups out there that people can reach out to. There's so many in San Jose that if they're not out there and, participating in the marches, they can obviously donate as well. So, just Google and if you have social media, there's groups out there that are doing the work and would be happy to, have these conversations as well.
We've been blessed with having Lupe Franco join us today, bringing up some issues of fundamental equity in our society that we need to consider. And thank you very much for joining us. Good luck.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, thank you so much.